watching, we were scheduled to have an AC client session, and that has been postponed until June. So today's calendar has us doing 2 workshops, 2 board discussion items, and then the special meeting. So I'd like to remind everybody, district staff and board members, that this meeting is being transcribed in real time so it can be viewed with closed captioning. Please speak at a reasonable pace so that the transcribers can fully capture what you are saying. Thank you very much. And we also, board, we need to designate somebody to be vice chair for this meeting. So, Mrs. Brill?
I would like to suggest that we designate Dr. Deborah Robinson.
All right, we have a motion second. Any discussion? All in favor? All opposed? You didn't even have a chance to say no, so. So our first item on the agenda is the budget workshop. Mr. Burke, Mr. Oswald.
Budget update. All right, good afternoon. Thank you. Yes, I'm joined here with Ms. Heather Knust, our budget director, and Leanne Evans, our treasurer. We are going to do our best to speak at a reasonable pace. We usually like to talk really fast, but we're going to slow it down a little bit. I'd like to start out with just a brief kind of rundown on the legislative session, or just the legislation that really impacts your budget for next year. The board will be provided on June 5th a comprehensive workshop with the whole legislative team and Mr. Tierney, where they'll go through everything that passed. We're just going to touch on those things, again, that have like a financial impact. It was an exciting session. We saw a tug-of-war of our finances and the board's local control throughout the session, and particularly the last few days. But there's some things we just want to bring to your attention in case you haven't already seen it. Some of this has played out in the news quite a bit, so I'll move pretty quick. But this year we had Senate Bill 7070. That was this year's really train bill for education. You may recall the last couple of years we had House Bill 7055 and House Bill 7069. Those were over 200 pages in length and touched on a variety of topics. 7070 does the same thing, but it's not quite as big. It was about 93 pages, and it's got a few handfuls of topics. So within 7070, we have the Family Empowerment Scholarship Program, or vouchers. This got a lot of press, but for the first time, we're going to see FEFP dollars, about $150 million from the FEFP going to private schools through these scholarships. They can serve up to 18,000 students across the state in this first year, and then it's allowed by statute to grow 0.25% each year, 0.25% of the total state population of students, that is. So that's about 7,200 kids a year it could grow by, or about $60 million a year. So over time, this program could potentially get to be a pretty large size. The 7070 also revamped the Best and Brightest teacher and principal scholarships or bonuses or awards. It eliminates the piece where teachers were eligible for that $6,000 scholarship, and part of the requirements were having their College Board ACT or SAT test. That's gone, but now what teachers are eligible for is for highly effective that meet the requirements of $2,500 scholarship or bonus, and then for effective teachers it falls to $1,000. And then principals also have some bonus provisions, and there's some new nuances on that. There can be some one-time recruitment scholarships, and they've renamed these scholarships a little bit. They're calling them retention awards, which is a little bit different. So we're waiting to get more details on that from the state on how that'll be implemented, but that'll be in play for our teachers next year and principals. And then probably some of the best news we received was in the area of our capital budget through 7070. The board has now got some flexibility granted back to them with the use of your 1.5 mils local capital outlay improvement millage. Those monies, when used for new construction now, the board will no longer need to get approval from the state for an ed plant survey. And also it eliminates the cost, the student station construction caps on those projects as well, which will give us some flexibility that we need to get this work done. We still, though, are constrained by just fiscal realities, and but again, it was very positive. This helps us quite a bit with our capital plan and the 10-year capital plan. I think we've covered that. So moving ahead, one last piece about 7070. They've revamped the turnaround program. You may recall traditional district-operated schools did have a slice of the Schools of Hope grant. We had some schools qualify, and those Schools of Hope grants were providing $2,000 per student. We now have a categorical allocation that will be part of the FEFP for turnaround schools that they call Turnaround School Supplemental Services that provide up to $500 per student for schools that qualify. And then House Bill 7123, I know you guys have this down pat after our efforts there, but at the end of the day, that's the tax package that provides the sales tax holiday and the hurricane preparedness holidays, and most importantly, it allows us to retain our referendum that the voters approved back in November. It does require on a go-forward basis that any referendums passed that is voted on and approved after July 1st, 2019, there are requirements that on those discretionary millage referendums that the charter schools would be included, and it specifies that charter schools would receive their proportionate share based on their enrollment or unweighted FTE. Requires that the charter schools would have to spend those dollars, in the spirit of the ballot language. And I shouldn't say spirit. It should the charter schools would have to use the dollars to carry out the intent of that referendum and that ballot language. So that's something we'll have to think about in the future and how we work that in. And then we've got Senate Bill 7030, which is the safety bill, security bill. It kind of picks up where the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Safety Act left off. You may recall last year, a part of that legislation required that any new dollars we got in safe schools had to go for just solely hiring additional officers. We got a little flexibility there now as this safe schools categorical continues to grow, that you can use the money for any of those things that promote school safety. There's a menu of things that the dollars could go to. Our board, and this has been the case for decades, we always spend above and beyond what we get in safe schools dollars, so that's really not an issue for us. And we also have the referendum, which is going to help us out quite a bit in that area. And then one thing just to keep on our radar, we've been talking about the district cost differential for a couple of years. There was a push this year. They had a consultant come in and do a new study that recommended that the state shift from kind of the market basket consumer price index approach to the DCD to a wage-based index. And now the EDR, the State Economic and Demographic Research arm of the legislature, has been tasked with developing that formula by October of 2019 so that the legislature could consider revising the DCD formula based on a new index, a wage index for FY21. So we'll continue to monitor that. Real quick, I'm going to give you just a little context on the budget in total. We've kept kind of our running tab here, and you can see for the 3 prior years, once we got to the final conference, got the final budget, we always kind of boil down to, okay, how much more money are we getting on a per student basis? And for the past couple of years, it's ranged from 1% to 1.39%. This year's budget is a little bit better, but you have to really kind of look at the fine print. If you look at just what's reported out of the increase per student, it would appear it's as high as 3.27%. That's really not accurate because we have a shift this year with the Best and Brightest program where that had been funded outside the FEFP in prior years. It's been shifted in as a categorical into the FEFP this year. So as a result, you've got $284 million showing up as a complete increase. But really, there's $233 million that were in Best and Brightest last year, which is outside the FEFP. So by shifting it in for just 1 year, it skews that year-over-year comparison. So what we've done is we've broken that out. It's over $100 per student is just Best and Brightest. So if you back that out to get a better read on the true increase, it falls to 1.92%. Within that 1.92%, we do have some categoricals that are restricted, including safe schools, mental health, and the turnaround program I just mentioned. If you back those out and say, okay, what do we really have in terms of kind of dollars that are flexible, it falls to an adjusted increase of 1.62%. So again, that's a little better, than where we were a year ago at 1.39. And of that 1.39 last year, a lot of that was restricted to safe schools and mental health. But at 1.62%, it's still fairly modest when we start thinking about what we'd like to do in the way of employee salary increases. So that's kind of the highlight. I want to turn it over to Ms. Knust, and she's going to take you through the operating budget and the work that your Budget Advisory Committee has been doing to get us to a balanced budget.
Mr. Shaw?
Mrs. Whitfield.
Thank you. Can I just ask a quick question on the first item where you talked about the Family Empowerment Scholarship? It's my understanding that amount of money and that amount of students that they're thinking about is statewide, right? Not just for us?
Oh, yes, 18,000 statewide.
Okay. And then how many students do we anticipate here? Do we have any idea of what might be the amount that comes in?
So I usually, if I look at, just to try to gauge it, our district in terms of enrollment represents about 6.5% of the state. So if we did, maybe rough estimate 6.5% of 18,000, which would be what, Ms. Knust, is that 480
Math
kids?
on this, Chief Financial Officer. Right now.
Where's the calculator? I can usually do those, but now I'm nervous.
Okay. I would never even try. So I guess the question I'm really asking is more about how much would it come out of our budget, do you think? And is it, there's not a separate allocation, I'm guessing. They're just saying that we would hand over that funding, right?
Right. It's going to be similar to, we've had the McKay scholarships for years, which are for exceptional student education. Yeah. And those dollars kind of just pass through us. So the money comes in and it goes right back out to the private provider. This will be handled in the same way. We're going to have some responsibility to report those students to the state. And then we'll basically hand the money right over.
And would we end up only handing over the student allocation, or is there any other additional funds that go along and follow the student? Do we have to add additional funds to that?
The statute spells it right out.
It says what we have to give.
It's pretty much the money follows the child, everything that's generated through the FEFP.
Okay. Okay.
Oh.
Thank you.
And, okay, we did the math. 6.5% of 18,000 is 1,170 students. So probably roughly as many as 1,000 plus kids.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, so now that you have an overview of the statewide budget impact, we're going to focus on Palm Beach County. So the FY20 budget, general fund budget, is $2.1 billion. The referendum comprises about 10%, or a little over $200 million. Schools represent the largest component of our budget, as they should, and the FEFP is the largest revenue driver of the general fund budget. So now we're going to look at the FEFP specifically for Palm Beach County. And I know there's a lot of numbers on this page, so I'm going to try to just break it down to a few key numbers. We're going to start with the unweighted FTE. That's the first row, row 1. You can see that our projected increase in enrollment is 746 students, and that's district-wide. The past couple years, we've been seeing that enrollment growth is starting to slow, and even in our neighboring districts, it's actually started to decline. So next I want to move down to the base student allocation. The increase in the base student allocation is $75. Once we take into consideration the district cost differential, which didn't change this year, the formula is still the same, and it's based on a 3-year average, so this year's rate is very similar to last year. Our base student allocation is $76.59. The base student allocation is where we really have the most flexibility in how we spend those funds. So next I want to move down to the categoricals. And the categoricals is where the state earmarks, they mandate specifically how we can spend those funds. There was a slight increase in safe schools and the mental health allocation of about $1.5 million. But there was a significant decrease in the digital classroom allocation. It's almost eliminated. It went from $2.9 million to a little less than $400,000, and that's, keep in mind, district-wide, including charter schools. And then what Mr. Burke talked about, the best and brightest allocation, you can see that on row 19. That represents $19.8 million of the allocation. So the total increase in state funding is $24.5 million. So now we're going to move on to the local funding. The Palm Beach County tax roll is projected to increase by 5.6%, and that is in line with what the county property appraiser is predicting as well. And you would think, or you all know, that our funding does not increase at the same rate as the property taxes. So even though that increases 5.6%, the legislature continued to roll back the RLE as they have in the past few years, giving us only credit for the increase in new construction. So you can see that our increase in local funding is $28.9 million for a total increase in funding of $53 million. So if we were to break that funding down by a per student basis, it's $248, but that includes the best and brightest allocation. So if you back out that best and brightest allocation, it's over $100, brings down the per student funding to $144 per student, or 1.85%. And then if you back out the increase in the categoricals that are earmarked for a specific purpose, we're down to $125 per student, or 1.61%. We also have to take into consideration the increase in charter school enrollment. So district-wide, we're looking at 746. We're looking to pretty much split that enrollment increase with charter schools. So the increase to charter schools is estimated at $8 million. So that leaves remaining net district funding available for next year's budget of $45.3 million, which seems like a lot of money, but then we have to look at what has the state already earmarked and what are the legislative mandates. So the legislature increased the FRS rate, the amount that we have to pay for FRS as a district. That's $2.5 million. Then we have to back out those categoricals because those are set aside for a specific purpose. The best and brightest being the largest at almost $20 million.
Mrs. Brill?
Thank you, and I just wanted to ask a quick question. I know this figure was in there, but what exactly did you say our funding per student is for now, and what is anticipated?
The funding per student, taking out the best and brightest, is $144.96 per student, or 1.85%. And then backing out not only the best and brightest, but the increase in the categoricals.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the total number.
Okay.
Oh,
what
it's
we fund is-
7,992.
7,000.
$992
Okay.
and 51 cents, excluding best and brightest.
Thank you. And that's currently, or
And currently, it's $7,847.55.
thank you.
You're welcome. So then when we have an increase in revenue, we also have to increase the board contingency to stay in compliance with board policy. We also have to take into consideration our salary settlements that we have this year for employee bargaining groups that are effective as of January 1st. We have to make sure to reflect a whole year's worth of expenses and annualize those. So that's about $2 million. Even though we have just a small increase expected increase in enrollment, we still have additional staff, not only basic teachers, but ESE, ELL is also support staff at the school sites. And then we always, our priority is to set aside an employee salary reserve equal to the amount of funding that we're getting per student, backing out the best and brightest and also the increase in the categoricals. So we've set aside $16.1 million, which is equivalent to the 1.61%. And then we also have school and department budget investments, which we're going to walk through today, of nearly $7 million. And those were offset by realignments and savings that we were able to realize for next year of approximately the same amount. And where those savings and realignments came from, approximately $2 million from realignments that we made within the ELL allocation that was then reinvested back into ELL. We've also seen, we had anticipated an increase in our worker comp claims rate, not only in Palm Beach County, but statewide. That increase never actually was realized. So we're at the point where we can now reduce the rate that we're charging. And then also with our school police officers, we've been paying a premium on those contracted officers. As we hire officers, we'll be able to realize the savings from the contracted premium that we were paying. And then also in our departments, there was an elimination of a director position, as well as some non-salary, which totaled at $7 million. So there is a slight deficit of $2.2 million, but when you consider the size of our budget at $2.1 billion, we are pretty close to being balanced, especially when we have some variables that are still outstanding. So now I'm going to move on to getting into more detail on our budget investments for FY20. We've spoken a lot in detail about the referendum and what's included within those referendum initiatives, so I'm going to focus on the new initiatives within the schools and the departments. We've aligned those investments to the strategic plan and the strategic themes. So we have $3.4 million that's invested in effective and relevant instruction to meet the needs of all students. $3 million of that is related to changes within the ELL allocation, as well as the increase of the non-salary of the fine arts allocation at elementary, middle, and high schools. And then we continue to see an increase in the amount we're spending on dual enrollment. There's also 3 positions that are being added within the departments. One is to help support the work with equity and access. And then there are 2 positions within curriculum to support curriculum and testing, not only with the FSA, but also AP, IB, and ACE, in addition to providing additional support to the testing coordinators. We added, that's where I'll move on to the next initiative, Positive and Supportive School Culture of $1.9 million. The majority of that is related to the high school testing coordinators that were added. And the reason why it falls under this initiative is because the purpose of adding that position was to free up time at the counselor. The next is talent development. And within talent development, we're adding a director for non-instructional recruitment, as well as 2 positions to provide support and coaching to new teachers and also employees within the district. Under high performance culture, there's 2 Broad residents that are being added to assist with the alignment and implementation of performance measurement metrics within the district. Under the operational initiatives, it's approximately $900,000, and the majority of that is work around maintenance. We have over 1,000 custodians district-wide, so we're adding a general manager for custodians as well as a technician, and also adding purchasing uniforms for all custodians district-wide. Under the board direct reports, we have the Inspector General's office, which is requesting to add a senior auditor position to audit the sales tax projects, and then 2 attorneys within the General Counsel's department to add as a result of increased work due to the sales tax, as well as increased work to not only general liability, but charter school litigation as well. And so the total of those investments is $7.2 million. It's pretty much offset by the realignments and savings we've been able to realize. And all of these initiatives we walked through at the last budget advisory committee in detail, and the slides are also included in your appendix as well.
Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you, and maybe it's in the slides and I didn't see it. Can we get the specifics, for instance, for the additional ELL and dual enrollment? Can we get specifics as to what's involved in each one of those, i.e. Talent development? I think you were talking about maybe a new director or something like that. Can we get that? I didn't see that in here.
Yes, it's included in the appendix, but we can also provide it as well.
Well, would you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, we'll look for it. I didn't see it.
Mrs. McQuinn?
My question has to do with, which is typically what I question, is adding people, positions to budgets, and I'm going to be specific with 3 here, but it's not to pick on those 3. When 2 of them specifically are asking for additional positions because, and the Inspector General and the General Counsel, let's put aside the charter school, but each of them have asked for one for additional monitoring or auditing of the referendum monies. And I need to be convinced that some things can't come off the table. It concerns me when we are asking for money and then we start funding administrative positions for that money when we have court, we have our oversight committees. So that is just, for me, it's a red flag. The other one that I question, I don't know about the charter. I know that we've had so many issues with legal, with charter. I would just like to see, in terms of legal and a charter position, that we are then taking on more in-house, since we're paying for an in-house position. The other is the talent development non-instructional director, to understand why we need another director level position at this point. Thanks.
Ms. Rico?
Thank you. I'd be happy to respond to the two items that we requested. So as the board may know, and as I know the budget office knows, we carefully go through our projections for the next year based on trend analysis from the past years. We monitor our legal hours put in, caseload, claims, and the trends. And so we do that in all categories. With respect to the transactional work, it's actually not monitoring. It's contracts, purchase orders, bid protests, bid reviews, language negotiations, which has been highly challenging with the intensive work that's going on, and due to the fact that it's a capital plan that goes for 10 years, we expect that this work is not going to be a one-off type of thing. Otherwise, we would just gone to outside counsel. So we really do balance those, and I do understand the sensitivities of adding a person rather than outsourcing it for a temporary situation. As for the litigation piece, while charter schools is part of our litigation load that's seen an uptick, we actually have had a very intense uptick in our EEO and HR employment-related litigation, and those attorneys are really maxed out. And when the attorneys get maxed out in terms of their caseload, we have to go to outside counsel. And so one example of that was last year, where we did have to go to outside counsel for something other than the extraordinary. We have very few matters that we outsource. The extraordinary ones was the House bill constitutional challenge and the referendum lawsuit. But other than that, it's been mild, except for one part of a charter school litigation that went outside, and the cost of that could have funded almost one of the attorneys we're asking for. So it's very expensive to go outside, and it doesn't really take us. It's like using a taxi instead of buying the car.
Mrs. Whitfield?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about the slide where you look at the budget outlook. This is just a question, but it looks like we are projecting a deficit there, and I just was curious, how does that align with, we're setting up for a deficit? So where does that money come from in the end?
Well,
Well, I'll just offer. So we're not quite balanced yet. We'll be bringing in late July. You'll have a tentative budget adoption, and we'll continue to work to bring this in to be fully balanced before we'd ask the board to vote on the budget. It's for the size of our budget, as Ms. Canoe said, that we're not alarmed at this point. We think we want to see how things play out. We're going to be closing the books on this year with fund balance. We'll be watching the tax roll closely, and we'll be looking for opportunities to shave dollars down and get this thing balanced. But I guess our main point was this is not a bad place to be for May 8th, and we'll keep working on it. I also wanted to mention, Dr. Fenoy dedicated a considerable amount of time to sit with every department head and scrub through their current budgets and their budget requests for next year. Dr. LaCava joined us at the table. I know Ms. McQuinn had a question about the non-instructional director. You want to
So there's good afternoon, board members. There's two parts to that answer. The first one was that we collapsed the director of labor, and Ms. Parr took two departments and made them one. So there's some savings there. The second part is that we just went through a rigorous assessment through the Florida Sterling Council, and one of the things that they continued to mention in that report that you're going to be getting very, very soon is that we do not have a very robust non-instructional marketing plan to hire AC and technicians. So they really wanted us to dedicate some of that time in regards to looking at that. So that was another reason that I decided to fund that position with the savings from Mrs. Parr's labor.
And
Dr. Robinson, and then Mrs. Brill, and then Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you. I want to circle back. I think that I am, just want to add some detail to Mrs. Andrews' question. So for me, on slide 11, I really would like to have all the bullet points under each one of those items. You know, it was moving kind of fast. Most of the things I think that that I understood it would most likely support, but I just need to have that written out, including the operational initiatives. And now specifically, the Broad residents, I heard you mention. How much do Broad residents cost us? Because I thought the Broad Foundation paid for the Broad residents.
The Broad Foundation pays for a third of the cost.
Just 1/3?
Yes.
Okay. And then also to continue, I also have some concerns about adding these positions to both legal and to IG. I need to have some kind of backup. I remember in days long ago, there was a presentation, in your first go-round as general counsel, there was a presentation on comparing the cost of outside counsel versus having additional people in-house. You know, I just need to see some kind of thoughtful analysis on that to get me to the place of thinking that this is appropriate. The other thing that I wonder is, can we buy the level of expertise that we need for this amount of money, or are we going to then say, well, we need somebody, you know, with 35 years of experience in this area of the fight as an outside counsel after we hire this person? So, I mean, I just have some concerns about adding those positions. And then the other thing is, I've had this conversation with Dr. Fenoy and others. Are we looking under any of these enumerated items on slide 11? I didn't hear it said. Are we looking to have somebody whose focus, whose job it is to look at and push us towards equity? Is that in here somewhere?
Yes, that's under the first bullet within the 3.4 million. There's a manager position to support the work with equity and access.
Okay. Did we do that job description already? No? Okay. I'm just making sure I'm not asleep at the wheel.
No.
Okay.
I mean, it would be supervised under Carlene Millen.
Okay, and so when do we expect that job? Because I want to debate that job description. So when do we expect that to come forward?
Good afternoon. I met with Mark Mitchell yesterday because first I had to find out, did we have an old job description, because that department, with the work that needs to be done, and he put me in contact with the current, I've got a printout of the current manager positions that do work, for example, in Diana Fetterman's office. And so, no, it hasn't been created. I had to find out did one exist in the past first. And so we had our meeting yesterday. I have a meeting scheduled back with him after pulling other equity directors or managers position in several of our surrounding districts to get some of that work. So that will be coming forth. Yes, and that was my next part. Once I get that information together, I plan to actually socialize that with each of the board members. But right now, it's just a matter of finding out what we currently have, and now that I know that we don't have that, drafting that, and then trying to make sure it's approved, hopefully by one of the June board meetings.
Okay,
that's
so
the goal.
Mr. Shaw, may I
Yes, ma'am.
finish? So I appreciate that. I've had this conversation with Dr. Fenoy. I can't remember if I had it with our deputy. But for me, the work of equity is much bigger than HR. And like, no disrespect. I mean, in my world, this person who's going to focus on equity would report to either the deputy or the superintendent. And I don't care what you call them. I don't do levels well, so chief, manager, director, whatever. I'm talking about the work and who they report to, because it's much larger than HR. So I would suggest that maybe we consider having some board workshops so the board can discuss what that looks like before you spend much more time investing in outlining the job description that, at least as I'm hearing it, that I'm going to push against. So Thank you.
All right, Mrs. Andrews and then Mrs. Whitfield.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson, for actually adding to that, because I'm really concerned. I'm in this building meeting with people all the time, and I like that we're doing these things, but for all of these departments and all of these initiatives, there should have been some kind of communications with the board member to kind of go over this. We're kind of doing it quickly now in this budget overview, but there's so much meat in all of this when we decide to say we're going to make these changes and spend this kind of money. And then I get this at a board meeting without really having some kind of conversation with all of the directors that are actually involved in this. And it makes me feel very inadequate to say that this is what I really want to do. And I'm hearing some comments from others here. So, you know, if this is going forward, I would request that I get a chance, and I don't know if the other board members, to meet with all these department heads and find out what is this, what's the underlying information as to why, as a district, we're going in this direction. I'd like the one on the operational initiatives, because I'm going to be talking about maintenance today. But I like a lot of these others, but then you have to educate me before you just put this out here, because the conversation could have been different if we had spoken to the directors, if we knew we were going in this direction, with having it all printed out here today. So next time, if we can do something like that, and even with this, maybe schedule for me so that I can meet and find out what's going on in each one of these departments. And just like you said, you've been identified as being weak in some areas. So I wish I could have known that, because that could help me better support this. Thank you.
Mrs. Whitfield?
Thank you. Similarly in this section, just to add on to that, the 1, 2, 3, 4, I know these are the goals that we have set for the organization, and this isn't really on you guys, but I feel like it would be nice to understand how well we're meeting those goals right now. Like, are these tasks actually something that we are achieving? And if we are achieving them, how well? This new funding, why would we think that this new funding would go towards making it better? What are we missing? I just would like to have both of those things to compare, not just the budget, but really the outcomes that we were asking for and whether or not we're actually getting there. Thanks.
Mrs. McQuinn?
Okay. I'm going to do run-on sentence here. So going back again to General Counsel, I 100% agree that we have much more charter school litigation. We know that's on our plates. And so I know that we need help there rather than going outside. And so I think I don't remember who asked for the cost analysis for that, but great, I wanted to weigh in on that. The other is, I don't often disagree with my colleague, Mrs. Andrews. Part of it I do, but I just know that if every one of us meets with every department, and then I still don't know what my colleagues think, and more to my point, I want the public to hear the discussion. Mm-hmm. That's why I didn't give a heads up to General Counsel or to Dr. LaCava. I want the public to hear what they have already thought out. So I like that open discussion. I know it's uncomfortable, but I think it's being a good steward of our money. The other is, I honestly have given thought since our last board meeting in terms of Dr. Robinson's ongoing vote against contracts because of the equity issue. And I go back again, I go back again to one of my first school board meetings when we were pretty much more than our hands slapped over not meeting equity goals. And I'm to the point almost that I want to vote against all of those contracts until we meet equity goals. And yet I know we can't shut down the business of the district. So to Ms. Whitfield's point, I think we need an update. Where are we?
Mrs. Brill?
Thank you. And all of this ties into what I was going to say. So, I think that I'm having a discussion item afterwards about a workshop. Along with that, I think this whole conversation is screaming workshop where we really just sit down, talk about, because this organization has evolved. We do have new initiatives. As Dr. Robinson said, I would like to see what the thought process is, even though, when it comes to statute, we have our 3 reports. We do have to be involved with the whole layout of the organization. Recently, we had some new job descriptions, and I did speak to Dr. Fenoy because we were not receiving the organization chart. And I had said to him that the organization chart's not ingrained in my brain, and it turned out we were moving one department, which ultimately got moved back. But I would like to request that after we have our board discussion, that we look to, setting up a workshop where we can talk about these new initiatives, talk about what the vision is, give our input, and as Dr. Robinson said, see, what the reporting relationships are going to be, and maybe work in the budget too. But I believe, as Mrs. McQuinn said, we need to have these conversations in public. I know that Dr. Fenoy is very comfortable with the fact that we just don't rubber stamp, that we sit here and we give input. So if we could put that down as a want, that we want to have a workshop, and if you can tailor that into something that makes sense, I would appreciate it.
Yeah. Mr. Oswald wanted to respond on that one, and then Mrs. Andrews.
Yeah, I want to thank the board members for your comments. We'll have staff will break down that and come back to you all with further how these items are being spent. We spent numerous meetings really looking at our strategic plan and how we're spending these dollars are in alignment of a specific initiatives. You heard Mr. Burke talk about the position that's the testing coordinator. We've heard, we've had numerous issues really looking at around when it comes to testing. So we'll break each of those down, explain how they align to our goals. This summer, we'll do an updated instructional workshop about once the test results come out, how we're aligning to those goals. So,
Mrs. Andrews?
And just to follow up, because I love Mrs. McQuinn, I'm definitely transparent, but when we come up with this kind of information, I would like to have some backup information, and if I needed to speak with the deputy or the superintendent, I could have that information. Surely I want the public to see what the proposals are. We may or may not agree, but I do believe we have to educate the board so that when we're sitting in here for an hour's workshop, we have that backup information and the knowledge and the information so that we can ask the right questions before making the decision. So I still may be meeting, but I definitely want to have backup information.
Ms. Rico?
Thank you. So I just wanted to bring something to your attention that Dr. Robinson clicked in my mind. Usually by this time of year, I would have had my end of the year report, and so that breakdown and trend analysis and comparison, which we have really sort of a mythical comparison now. Back when we first started doing it, it was a real comparison to actual outside counsel fees. Now we have it based against a mythical hourly if we had taken it out. And this year my evaluation is in September, so it just clicked in my mind that you didn't get that report. So I'll be happy to break down those dollars and do those projections for you. And get that to you so that you can see the trending that we have. Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, it sounds like we probably need to do a workshop dedicated to department budget requests for next year. We did spend, we had a 3-hour session with the Budget Advisory Committee where we went through the breakdown of what's behind all these numbers in detail. And those slides are in the appendix. You have to go past what we plan to present here today, past discussion. You'll see some appendix slides. That's just going to show you detail on what ultimately was approved. There were department requests and other things that the superintendent went through, and we were unable to fund, with the exception of school police. We're trying to make sure we do everything the school police needs, and we're working through that. So to spend some more time on it is no problem for staff. We have that. Ms. Knust and her team did a nice job of shepherding that process where we capture all the department requests, link them to the strategic plan, and then the superintendent ultimately went through, along with the deputy superintendent and the leadership team, and decided what was going to be brought forward or not. So we'll just have to try to get some time. We've got time, fortunately. You're not going to be asked to take action on this budget till late July, so we should have time to be able to get that session scheduled.
Right.
And there is that vodcast of the Budget Advisory Committee meetings out there if people are interested and want to go back and see that.
Right. A couple observations. The first one is on the positions and the attorneys related, and the comment was made about charter schools. We have a charter school department, and historically they do all of the contract reviews and everything. So I would like to have more discussion about, is that a change from what we've done or not? So that's just some information. The comment I'm about to make is one that's intended for 4 years from now, because there's a major issue that this board has got to be prepared for, and that's with the approval of 7123. the impact is going to start immediately. So I'd like to ask staff, and I did talk to Mr. Burke with this, so I think he's got this list, but this is so the public's aware of the impact of what could happen. I'd like to ask for some very specific things. The first one is, I would like the board to get information on the financial status of every one of the charter schools. If there are any charter schools that are in, I don't want to say financial stress, but an update on the financial status of our charter schools. The ones that are in good financial, not a big deal. The second piece is, I'd like for us to have some information on the number of teachers that are in charter schools in this county that are either totally non-certified to be teaching, or the number of schools that are using day-to-day substitutes. Because if there's an expectation for these teachers in the future to receive money and salary, we need to have some idea on how the accountability. The third item is that I'd like for us to have a review of all of the charter schools, their compliance with all of the safety requirements that are required in both the safety bill, district requirements, and so that we have some assurances that we're in compliance with the new requirements of the law. But specifically, how are we going to enforce those requirements? The next part is that in the event that something doesn't happen in the next 4 years legislatively, some plan on how the staff recommends that the accountability be provided by these charter schools for the use of the money. The bill requires that charter schools have to spend it for the reasons that are stated, but right now there's nothing in place for that to happen unless we create it. And if it's IROC or whatever that mechanism is, we need to deal with that and start planning, and a plan that go forward from today on, that all new charter school contracts include language that this board would expect, so they would be in compliance with whatever our expectations are in the event that we have to do that. Mr. Burke, did I cover all the things that we had talked about?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. Ms. Rico?
Mr. Shaw, your comments just forced me to ask to be heard on this subject. So when we were talking about this additional litigation attorney, although there was contemplated some charter school litigation, as we have had in the past, it also contemplates this other EEO and employment. But as you've commented on the charter school accountability piece, the litigation and extraordinary litigation that we had this year over the accountability and holding the board's decision to terminate a charter school caused over $50,000 in outside attorney's fees. Why? Due to the fact that at the same time, there were over 4 lawsuits filed by that very charter school to try to block this board's decision to hold them accountable for extreme financial mismanagement. We are now facing 5 lawsuits. The additional one is bankruptcy, and that has caused us to add an additional outside counsel for the expertise of bankruptcy, because you have to be certified in bankruptcy court to participate in that process. So that's an example of what happens when the board takes steps to hold their accountability, and what can happen in terms of the resultant litigation. And we don't have the staff to litigate 4 complex lawsuits at the same time, and that's what causes us to go outside. So that's just an example of where this goes in our office.
Right. Mrs. McQuinn?
One more thing to add to Mr. Shaw's whatever discussion we're going to have about the charter school accountability. And for me, that's what it's about. It's accountability. So what I don't know if we're allowed to know, but in terms of, can we know what their teachers are paid, their salary structure, schedule, also their administrators. And I have spoken with 2 charter school members of their boards in terms of transparency about how much they pay for non-classroom salaries. Because in one situation over 4 years, one of those salaries could have paid a $500,000 project. So I want that. I want that information, and I want the public to have that information if we're allowed to have it.
And I think the answer to that is we are. All of their salaries are public information. So, Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. So I really just wanted to apologize to staff because I stopped looking when it said discussion. So I didn't see the appendix part. So I see you have a lot of that outlined, but I do hope that we have the workshop so that we can kind of dig into it more. The other thing is that I also need to hear about the expansion of what was formerly called MTSS. Now I think it's called Behavior Coach, which is not the same as what are they called? Mental health professionals? I mean, and I think at some point, I think we probably need to look at the layering of these services because we do have layers of services, but I'm going to maintain that the former MTSS, now known as behavior coaches, they're the foundation of this work. And I will continue to push and fight and scrap and claw or whatever I need to do until we have one in every school. I get what Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, the law said, and we're complying with that. But I'm talking about the people who really will prevent problems and not just diagnose them. So I need to see that. When we come back and have the conversation, because it's only been 9 years, I think, that I've been fighting about this, and I think that we have consensus. We've had consensus on the board about this, and I think that I've been clear about the difference in these positions, and if I need to draw pictures for the workshop, I'll be happy to do that. However, I need to explain this because I need people to understand that we have to have the foundational work being done too. So I'd like to see that expansion, Mr. Deputy.
Thank you. Just one quick, just to make sure, when I talked about the issue of compliance with charter schools on the safety, that also includes a review of the hardening issue of the schools, because we have charter schools that are located in quite a variety of different locations, and Chief Kitzrow and I had that conversation. Mr. Burke, capital budget.
Okay, thanks. I think, I think we pretty much covered the operating budget. We'll be back again with the follow-up workshop. I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Evans and take it away.
Good afternoon. So the capital budget, this is actually the first time you've seen the capital plan this early. We usually bring it to you in July. So we're a couple months ahead of schedule. So this is the capital plan. You've had a 10-year plan. We've just added one more year on. So this slide is really pointing out the changes we've made from last year's plan. So the significant changes, we've increased the money for air conditioning significantly. And that's going to be funded with borrowing, 2 5-year borrowings that we'll be doing in FY20 and 21 to pay for that. We're also increasing the funding for computers to address end-of-life issue for units with the Windows 7 operating system. When we developed this plan, we had planned to do it with 2 3-year borrowings, and as the person that does the investment in debt for you, I tell you that's really not the best way of doing it. And if we have any wiggle room in the capital plan, which we do now for FY20, it's going to go to buy the computers rather than finance them. If you think about if we're paying for them over 3 years, at the end of 3 years, they don't have a lot of life left in them. It just doesn't make sense to do that. So we're trying to find a better way of doing that. For the building, we're doing a remodel for school police and an emergency operations center. That's been added to the plan. A modular addition for South Intensive, a modular addition for Sunset Palms, grades 6 through 8, to be used until the middle school's been approved, which doesn't really need to be approved by DOE anymore. So that's something we're looking at. Wi-Fi on school buses, and that's going to accomplish 2 things. First of all, it's going to give the students access to do homework on the way home. It will have the same filters that they have in the classroom, so it's not a wide open Wi-Fi environment. It will also give access to school to police to be able to monitor cameras on the buses, and those are going to be added in as well. And then increased funding for musical instruments, which is long overdue. So that's the significant changes. We've given you a list of the construction projects, and I just want to point out the ones in italics are the ones on the referendum project list. The ones that are in bold are new to the plan, and I've mentioned all of them already with the exception of Transportation West Central at Skis Road, and that's something we'll be talking with the Sales Tax Oversight Committee as well. When we did the referendum project list, we had North Transportation, South Transportation, and West Central. If you remember, the two North and South were at 12.5 million. The West Central was at 15. It was higher because we didn't know if we'd have approval to build the transportation complex at Skis Road. Now that we do, we're breaking that out. So 12.5 will go to that new complex, and 2.5 stays with the original West Central, which was always our plan. We just couldn't do that till we had county approval.
Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you. Could somebody tell me if we're going to get a module or if we're going to get some support for Crossroads Academy? I think there has been some discussion about some improvements over there at Crossroads Academy. So where is that in here?
I don't know if that's in here. I know Superintendent, I've been part of conversations with Superintendent Ms. Paul about providing him some more space for the school administration and some enhancements there. I know he's visited the school and had some concerns, so I'm not sure that's fully gelled yet, but I believe Ms. Paul is working on it.
Typically, we put the projects on when it is essentially an addition. So it's not just one portable or two portables. It's an addition, like a building. We lift it here. Otherwise, there's money in the capital plan specifically for moving portables and moving modular classrooms. They're not usually identified one by one on the plan because, quite frankly, we don't know what the request is going to be for 2 years from now. So when we look at this long-term plan, there is a bucket of money available to move portables, and I'm certain that's how it would be funded. But to this date, I don't have the details on Crossroads.
Well, I'd like a little bit more information because it's an emergency situation out there with the school.
Ms. Andrews, we are aware of that. We've done some work at Crossroads. Our intent is to try to replace that first portable where they use it as administration. And so we're trying to work the plan as we speak on that.
Mrs. Brill?
Thank you. And this question's for Mr. Burke. I became so focused, my obsession was House Bill 7123, that I lost track, and I want to confirm this, with the exempting of projects funded by local capital outlay millage from the educational plant survey. Does that mean we're going to be able to build Sunset Palms Middle School? Does that fall under that? Yay!
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Right. So this plan shows you like two options. We had where we could just do the expansion of the elementary school or the complete middle school. The door has been open to do the whole middle school.
So as a follow-up, I'd like to make sure that we have a conversation rather soon because Krista McAuliffe is bursting at the seams. And I truly believe that once we build that middle school, we may see one of the charter schools that we're having some issues with close. So I would appreciate that.
One of the things that I was going to mention later on, but I'll just bring it up right now, we were thrilled with the legislative change. And we're hopeful, but didn't really know if it was going to be there. So the plan you have in front of you doesn't include potential changes that we could have. So I've already had one meeting with facilities. I know that they're meeting pretty much consistently on what projects will need to change, reevaluating projects based on the new flexibility that we have. There are some instances where we were building a school in a certain way to meet the law, and now the law has changed. We may have a more effective and efficient way of doing it now that we're out of those boxes. So we'll be coming back to you with updates.
And we need the governor to sign off and
absolutely
make that law.
As a follow-up, I would like to request that we also explore the possibility of a public-private partnership in order to expedite the building.
So as we speak through these and work through these new developments, we're definitely looking at all options to that point, but I'm just waiting for the governor to sign. But we are working on kind of several working on several options.
All right, Mrs. McQuinn, Dr. Robinson. Okay, Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. So the modular where is it? The modular addition for South Intensive. What is that? Is that a short-term fix? Do we have a long-term fix?
I guess I'll just stay here.
I think we should.
Got an
That's okay.
ensemble cast here today.
So what we're exploring now is we have excess concretables in the district. And so based on the new legislation, once the governor signs, we're trying to see what flexibility we have in moving those buildings around and possibly creating a new school through the modulars. At this time, again, we want to see if we have permission or will be granted permission to move those buildings to that site and hopefully demo the rest of the site and basically create a new a learning space for those kids.
I have more.
Dr. Robinson?
So then, I think you kind of mentioned it. So the new legislation, does it change the rules on requiring permission for demolition too?
Not to my knowledge, not to my knowledge, but because that's a unique space and it's not per se a school, it's a former church, we are investigating whether we would have to go through that process as we would for a normal school.
Okay, and then one more for now. Then I don't see on here, well, maybe it's premature, but I think we're going to have a workshop on the Conservatory High School. Am I correct?
Mr. Oswald?
Yes, the board gave a recommendation for staff to come back with some recommendations for a potential conservatory high school. So staff's working on that now. We'll be coming back at a future date.
Okay, so it would be my hope that we would be able to give clear direction, so by the time we adopt the budget in September, it's either in, which I hope is in, or we know it's out based on board direction. But yeah, so we can explore that. And I'm gonna ease one more question in. So the musical instruments, are we going back to the good old days where all children can take music?
We're going to have money in every school's budget for musical instruments.
For each child? Or for 5 children per school? I mean, tell me what we're talking about.
It's not gonna, we're at a beginning place to provide monies for each school. I don't think it will cover for every student.
Okay, so as a follow-up, would you give me an estimate in writing later?
Yes.
What percentage of children I can expect will have musical instruments provided to them by their school for August 2019?
Okay.
Mrs. Whitfield?
Just since we're talking, since you mentioned the musical instruments, I feel like I read somewhere that you had added in some money for art supplies too for the first time in forever and ever and ever. I just publicly thank you. Holy heck. I'm so excited. Thank you.
Yes, we have. And, just this budget in general, thanks to the voters of Palm Beach County, is one of the best budgets we've been able to put together for some time and address some of those things that have been outstanding for years. So, in particular, the arts and with the musical instruments, the principals were really pleased to hear some of this information. So
And the musical instruments, I know it's going from $140,000 a year to $1.5 million a year. So it's more than 10 times. It's going from $140,000 a year district-wide to $1.5 million a year. So it's a significant increase.
Magnet choice, excluding them.
This is just a line item for musical instruments. So it's on top of anything that's out there now.
And the thought is it'll be a recurring $1.5 million every year so that the schools can plan and replace and upgrade their instruments,
Yeah, just another piece of information. This was a legislative win that we had that stayed completely under the radar the entire legislative session. But the language that was literally written relating to the lease purchase exclusion from having to be in compliance with the per pupil station was actually literally written at night by Ron LaFace and Megan White. So our lobbyists were the ones who wrote that legislation and filed it at about 11 o'clock. They wrote it overnight, and at 8 o'clock the next morning filed the legislation. So, Mr. Burke, debt service.
1 second. Okay, go ahead.
All right. Mr. Burke, debt service.
Yes, so this is Ms. Evans' favorite slide. I have to let her take it.
It is. And I just want to point out, we're using COPS to finance most of the construction projects and site acquisition. We have 4 short-term debt issues that are included, 2 for computers and 2 for air conditioning. I'm hoping that it's only 1 for computers by the time we balanced. There's one other item that'll be added. You have an agenda item later in your special meeting today regarding the sales tax financing, and we're happy, and you'll see that later today. But we're happy that the cost of that will fit within the interest earnings. It would not come out of project costs for sales tax. So you'll see that later today.
That was went to the Finance Committee about a week or two ago.
Yeah.
It's a really positive thing to have that type of flexibility and spending authority at virtually no
Right.
cost to us. So
Right.
Ms. Evans is humble here. She did a really nice job with that.
It did turn out really nice. It's going to allow us, normally, you have to have the cash in the bank before you can issue a contract. So when you look at a high school, it's going to be done over 3 years. So either we had to wait and prolong those projects or find a way to bring that money in early. So cash flow wise, we don't really need it, but to comply with state law, we do. So the borrowing rate, assuming we don't actually need the cash, is 0.1%. So it's a really good transaction, and I'll give the plug to PNC for the one they submitted the great bid. So we're very happy about that. Okay, so the variables on the capital budget, things that we're still waiting on, very similar to what Ms. Canuse talked about, the tax roll. That does directly impact capital because the 1.5 mils comes here for capital, so we're waiting for that. State funding for capital charter school capital outlay, we did have good news there that the state fully funded that. So that's $10 million in the budget that we don't need to send to charters this year. That's going to help offset that borrowing for computers. The bad news is the PICO funds that have been forecast over the 10 years, the state did not fund that this year. That's about $3.5 million reduction for this year. It's $45 million over the 10-year window. So it does have a significant impact to us. Impact fees, we have good news there. That was approved by the county. We're working with county staff to finalize what those budget numbers should be. And we've already factored in some numbers, not in the version you have, but the next one you see will have that included. It's going to help offset the PICO funds and some of the other challenges we face. Legislative issues, we have a lot of work to do. Once the governor signs off on that bill, we have a lot of things to evaluate. So you'll see for tentative adoption, we'll have some changes, and we'll outline what those are. So you'll be able to see clearly what changes we made. We are looking in the future for additional needs for maintenance, staff, preventive maintenance. We want to make sure we can avoid another backlog if possible, and that's a significant concern. Between IT and ed technology, they've asked for some additional money to get us to a 1-to-1 ratio for students and computers. They'd like to have an extra $4 million a year starting in FY21. So it doesn't impact this next year capital budget, but it's something we're trying to plan on for next year so that we can get to that goal. And one of the big concerns we have is rising construction costs. We are seeing that on every project that's being bid. So it's something we're monitoring very closely. And to echo on the sentiment, the budget does look good. We've been able to put in a lot of things that people have asked for. A lot of it, vast majority of the budget, it's still from the sales tax referendum. So again, we thank the voters of Palm Beach County for approving that, and it's helping to address all the deferred maintenance items that are out there so that money is dedicated to specific projects. And we're working with ISOC to make sure we report that back to the public regularly. Yeah. With that, I'll hand it back to Mr. Burke.
Ms. Evans, and
Yes.
Just to be sure that I'm accurate on this, even though PICO funds were not included for regular school district operations, I believe it was $158 million that was put in for charter school capital outlay.
That's correct.
And the good news is we don't have to, that takes us off the hook from providing any of the capital outlay millage money locally. But yeah, that was a hit. We usually pick up a few million, right?
Yeah, it's usually about $2.7 million for maintenance that we will not receive this year.
We've pretty much covered it, Vice Chairman Shaw. We had a slide here with our highlights. We've covered this. Again, it was really the referendum that made this such a positive budget. We have the timeline laid out. The Budget Advisory Committee has spent a considerable amount of time going through this, and they'll be working in June to finalize their annual report to the board. And they've been supportive to date of everything that's been recommended. And then we'll work to get another workshop scheduled so that we can follow up to those questions that were raised today. And I think we've covered it.
Right. Thank you very much. We really do appreciate all the work that goes into this. And this was a good start for us with questions. So the deliverables from this meeting was a request from the board for a budget workshop, a review of the information related to charter schools for future planning, and some of the issues that were brought up by board members related to personnel requests in the budget. So with that, we'll move to our next item, which is the workshop for policy 5.74. Mr. Oswald.
Yeah, our second workshop is 5.74, Students Experiencing Homelessness. I asked Dr. Licata and the rest of the team to come on up for this workshop. And I want to draw the board's attention, this particular policy will also have its first read tonight due to a recent audit. It's important that we put this on the docket to get the updated changes. And I'll turn over to Dr. Licata and the team to talk about the changes in this policy.